And good afternoon, and welcome to Deering Live. It is Wednesday today, and it's the later time of 4 o'clock Pacific, 7 o'clock Eastern. And we've got a really good show for you guys today. We're happy to be back after another week off. So, you take time off, Dave. You take a little vacation from Deering Live, maybe? How you
No, well, we
feeling?
got Chris Pandolfi coming up in a couple weeks, so
Yeah,
not yet.
yeah, but this is not who we got today. Got a nice, really exciting one today. So we're very. I like the way we kind of shroud this thing in mystery at the beginning of the show, like we haven't been announcing it for the last week or so. But we won't get into that. All right. So before we get started, we just wanted to kind of make a couple of announcements. First and foremost, some of you astute and observant people out there may have noticed that we launched a limited run of our Good Time line called the Cherry Limited. They are a cherry maple cherry split rim with a beautiful peg head veneer, also in cherry. It's a really, really nice looking and beautiful sounding instrument. There are only 100 of them, and they can only be bought through select Deering dealers. So do go to the homepage, deeringbanjos.com, check those out and get them before they all go. And from what I hear, they've been going pretty quickly already. So hopefully there's some left. And I think this weekend, we're doing it just a Dads and Grads sale because it's Father's
We
Day.
sure are. Dads and grads. Yeah.
Grads, of which I have both. I am a dad and I have a grad, which is awesome. There we go.
And then
So keep
get
on
some
coming.
pics.
Get some pics, get some gear, get some merch, get some swag. But that's not why we're here. We just like to talk about this stuff at the top of the show. But we've got a much more important reason, and we'll bring in our guest, I think, in just a second. So this week we are excited to feature one of our favorite people in banjo. She's an award-winning banjoist. She's a founder of the incredible Compass Records, and she, as of I think a few days ago, the newly elected vice president of the Nashville chapter of the Recording Academy, which is pretty incredible. We're going to bring her in a second to talk about her new record that's coming out. We're going to be talking about Unpacking the Blues on five-string banjo, and her new ArtistWorks series. There's a lot going on here, and there's a special treat in store kind of midway through the show. So we'll get to it. Let's bring her in, the incredible Miss Alison Brown.
Well, you guys always make me blush. Thank you, Jamie.
Try. Now, we saw you at Melfest a few weeks back, which was fun.
That was a lot of fun. A bit
It was a
muddy
lot of fun.
the day I saw you.
It was. But we got to hang out with the
Muddy,
guys.
muddy and chilly.
It was an epic tempest, but it was
Epic
still great to
tempest.
see you.
How was your time there? Because I know you're always running around at Melfest like a crazy person.
It was great. We had two really fun sets and managed not to get soaked to the skin. And it's always, it's such a great way to start off festival season. A great way to reconnect with everybody after the winter. So I always feel very privileged to get to be there.
It's like we always come out of hibernation and we just meet in a field in the middle of Wilkesboro, North Carolina.
Yeah, it just always makes me think of the old Highland clan gatherings, what that must have been like in Scotland, because there's kind of an element of that, and under the big trees there in Wilkesboro, North Carolina, people
Yep.
coming, all the bluegrass clans gather.
This is
It's
true.
nice.
This is true. And we should explain as well that you're coming out to San Diego next week to come see us, which is very exciting. But you're not playing a Julia Bell right now because it is.
Because it needed a little bit of TLC and refurbishment in the shop, so I know it's in Greg's magical fingers are
Yes.
doing their thing, getting it, giving it a little bit of a spa day.
It's ready to go. It's the very spa. We had steam towels. We had the whole thing. A
Great,
massage.
sign me up.
Yep,
Sign me
absolutely.
up. I'll be there.
Banjos only, no humans allowed. So we'll bring you in next time. Very
Okay.
good. Well, do you want to kick off the top of the show with a bit of a tune for us?
I guess I could do that. Just I thought you were going to ask me to play something, and I'm like, after spending the last week playing a lot of forward rolls really slowly, I'm just trying to remember what I know how to play faster on the banjo. But here's a little bit of a Stephen Foster tune that I love. That I love it because it has the word banjo in the lyric, and then I'll play a little bit of Sally Ann just because I love that one too, and it always makes me think of all the old time music and the way Earl Scruggs took some of that inspiration and turned it into the banjo rocket ship that we all now know and love. So yeah, here's one you'll know.
Yeah, that's so good. It's always so great to hear you play. So inspiring to hear you play.
Oh, you're so nice to say that. Thank you, Dave. I appreciate that.
Well, thanks for being here, and congratulations on the new album on banjo.
Thank you.
Really, really good recording.
I appreciate that too. Yeah, it's eclectic. I was going to call it Sorry Not Sorry, but then I figured, well, I'll just own it. I'm a banjo player.
Well, before we get into that, I want to talk a lot about the record. But before we get into that, you mentioned at the top that you were about playing a lot of forward rolls slowly. So, can you tell us what's that's all about?
Yeah, well, I'm super excited to collaborate with ArtistWorks to launch a banjo school that I guess is going to be launching this summer. And so it's a soup to nuts course from the most basic stuff to the more advanced stuff. And so I've just spent the last week out in Napa kind of trying to break it down and thinking about how to present, especially like Scruggs rooted three-finger style playing, to people so that they can get into enjoying the banjo as expeditiously as possible. So really kind of gearing a lot of my thinking towards people who are at the high beginning to intermediate level and how to help them on their banjo journey so that they can get in the jam session and join in as quickly and as painlessly as possible. It's been pretty
Awesome.
fun. It's fun to think back to, kind of my thought process when I was a teenager, which was quite a while ago. It was almost back before they invented plastic, I think, but not quite. And just try to remember the things that, kind of what the aha moments were for me, and but the things that challenged me too, and how to help people pass those points to keep them enjoying the banjo. Because as we all know in this community, it's such an amazingly rich instrument musically, historically, in terms of the community. And I think so many people's lives would be so much richer for being a part of this community. So that's my hope with the course, is to bring a lot more people into the fold.
That's great. That's great. And when is this supposed to launch?
Well, I believe that it's going to launch end of July, beginning of August.
Okay. All right. Well, everybody keep a lookout. The ArtistWorks people do, what they do is so great over there. And there's the Tony Trishka course and the Noam Bukelny course on there. So yeah, definitely be checking it out. How are you differentiating from the Noam and the Tony courses? Is there something that you're doing a little bit different?
Yeah, well, I guess I watched all of Noam's course, and I would love to know half of everything Noam has forgotten. I mean, he's such a phenomenal player. His playing really, his course, there's a lot of information that's very scalar oriented. And a lot of tools that I felt that for somebody just starting out on the banjo, they might be a little bit, beyond their reach. So I wanted to really spend a lot of time in my course, at least at this stage of the course, thinking about ways to explain to people how they can incorporate melody into the role. Because when I've taught at banjo camps, I've found that to be a big thing that's a stumbling block for folks. It's like they can learn from tab, but they can't figure out how to make up their own solo. So we spent a lot of time talking about finding melodies on the banjo, and then talked about a lot of different roll patterns and how they can lead you to different places melodically to try to take some of the guesswork out of how to make it kind of seemingly happen on the spot when you're in a jam session. So I think that maybe that's a little bit different take. I mean, there's some bells and whistles there too, on the more advanced stuff, but I really tried to give a deep dive into using different licks, for example, like the potato lick that we all learned. Well, that's a great lick for setting up a melody anytime you've got a melody on the third string, because it goes right to your third string. So if you're playing Rollin' My Sweet Baby's Arms, you could go Rollin' My Sweet Baby's Arms, thinking about licks that way as musical phrases that can set up different pieces of melody for you. So I'd say that that's one of the things that will probably differentiate it from the other courses.
And I see a lot of students that can't have the same problem. They almost don't know what the melody of the song is, because they've learned in a banjo arrangement, which has a lot of other notes in it.
Right, exactly.
Is there something you can tell people right now, maybe on how to figure out what the melody is and how to practice that part?
Yeah, well, the first thing is to really try to get your ear connected to the instrument, because I find that too. A lot of people, you play this chord, but they can't really figure out where to grab the first melody note. So a lot of times I'll tell people just hold your banjo and challenge yourself, strum that G chord and challenge yourself to think about what string you would start on if you were going to play Jingle Bells, just some melody that's deeply ingrained, and know there it is on the second string, and find other melodies like that that are just, super simple, like, any of those Christmas tunes, they're so deeply ingrained, or really anything else, like, any simple melody. Start by strumming your G chord, and then think about, okay, how would I find that? And then find it just using open strings, because a lot of times those simple melodies, they're all right there in the G scale anyway. So they're all right there under your fingers. Your fingers are probably not going to even have to go, like, maybe past the second fret, third fret. I'm trying to think of why you would need to do that if you're using open strings. So that's the starting point, because to play anything, you need to be able to find a piece of the melody, at least the beginning piece of the melody. And any solo that you do, I mean, I'm a true believer in, you can never go wrong playing the melody. So I always tell people that. But you don't have to play the melody the whole time, but it's very important to state it when you start off. So, something like if you're in a jam and you don't know the tune, try to find the beginning part of the melody and state that. And then you can kind of go off on your own path, as you go on.
Yeah.
But I guess the other thing about it is, like, we really kind of took a look at all the patterns in the bluegrass, the structure of bluegrass songs, because most of the bluegrass songbook is made up of, like, these 16-bar chunks. And it's all like these 1, 4, 5 chords. So I taught people how to do like a crash course in Nashville number system, because for me, that's a really helpful way to look at something on the page and see what's happening. I kind of figured that if people could see it, maybe they could understand more quickly that it's just these same patterns of 1 chords and 4 chords and 5 chords that keep cropping up. So I charted out a bunch, and I'm like, 1, 5, 1, 1, like a G, D, G, G, counting in 2 is a really common way that songs end. Like a lot of bluegrass songs end with that, like even Roll in My Sweet Baby's Arms ends with that phrase. So if you know that, then if you can have a bunch of musical phrases in your pocket that say 1, 5, 1, 1, then you know that you can just insert those. Just the way, like, when you learn a language, you don't just learn words, like you learn phrases, like Yo quiero Taco Bell or whatever. Yo quiero is a phrase that says I want in Spanish, and then you can add whatever you want on the end of it. And I think music's kind of the same. So just trying to make it, rather than seeming like this impossible universe, like how do you possibly ever organize all this information to where you can get your arms around it. I think it is pretty simple if you break it down that way.
Yeah. We have a question here from Joseph Brosk, a regular viewer on During Live. I'm an old and advanced beginner banjo guy, overwhelmed by the richness of the banjo. How do you overcome banjo ADHD to focus enough to become proficient? I keep bouncing from one style to another.
I know what you mean, Joseph, because I have jazz guitar ADHD, and I'm always like on those teaching platforms, and then I just can never stay in the jazz course long enough to really soak up all the information. And I think that that's one of the challenges, honestly, of having so much information at our fingertips now compared to how it was when I learned to play. Like when I learned to play banjo, there obviously was no online resource at all. And if you wanted to figure out how Earl did it, you're slowing the record down to 16 and a half RPM or whatever, and really having to dig it out. So when you actually did learn it, you really owned it. And nowadays you can go to YouTube and kind of gloss over all this information, but it's so hard to internalize it. So how do you do that? And I just find, for me, you have to dedicate yourself to going over and over and over it to make sure that it's really stuck in your head. And then part 2 is that you have to find an application for it, because the information just as a standalone bit of information isn't going to get you very far. You need to take that information, put it in a tune or tunes, practice those tunes till they're really under your fingers, and then get out there with other people and play them, and then you will own it. So I'm saying that to myself as much as to Joseph, because that's what I need to do with the jazz guitar stuff that I'm always trying to work on. And that's the stumbling block for me, is I never get out there and force myself to really use the information. And once you do that, though, it will be yours. And then I think it kind of keeps you from jumping around so much trying to find that one thing. You just have to commit to one and own it,
Yeah, that information can really evaporate if you it's not if you don't use it, it's like it can slowly dissipate. Definitely. Um, I have a question too. Just looking at your playing, like on that song that you played at the top, and all you're playing, it's your rhythmic timing is is so together.
Aw,
No matter if you're
thank you.
playing something that's complex or something that's slower and just and it's always right there. How do you really lock in and practice that rhythmic timing to get that together?
Yes. Well, first of all, I really appreciate you saying that because I'm married to a bass player, as you know. And so I think when you're married to a bass player, your timing can never be good enough. So I really appreciate that. Well, I think the main thing is, and I hate to say it because it sounds so boring, but really practicing with a time source. And these days, it doesn't have to be a metronome. There are backing tracks that you can use that make it more fun. That's really important because otherwise, if you sit in your room and you practice by yourself, you will reinforce all your bad habits. And there may be a part of a tune where you always drag because it's hard to get your fingers from here to here or whatever it is. And you're not going to know about it until you try to play it with a time source and realize that's where you drag or that's where you rush. So that's the trick. And then, playing with other people who hopefully, if they don't have great time themselves, at least are aware that that's what they're trying to achieve. Because knowing the bar you're trying to hit, that's like the first part of the battle. If you don't know there's a problem, you can't fix it.
Right.
So, but if everybody's aware that that's what they're trying to do is play in really good time, then playing with that group of people that are all kind of very like-minded, then that would be a help too. But there's nothing better than like that time source, whether it's a backing track or a metronome or some combination of the two things, and then just being aware and listening for it. Because as a banjo player, you have that responsibility in the band. You're like like the hi-hat, the 16th notes. You've got to really subdivide those notes as equally as humanly possible. And there are guys who do that so fantastically, like Terry Bauckham is one of those players.
Yeah.
Like the right-hand metronome. So envious of those guys, and I listen to that and aspire to that. So thank you for saying what you did. I really appreciate it.
Let's see. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the blues, playing some blues, make getting the your blues playing a little bit more developed. And so, what would you do to rhythmically change it up, or chordally change it up when playing a blues tune on the 5 string?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and one that I will be ever more qualified to answer as time goes on, because it's one of my personal musical quests at the moment. Thinking about how to expand beyond just like the bluegrass harmony that's so based on just the triad of root 3/5. That's like your G chord, your C chord, and that tends to be the box that we are in when we first start off in bluegrass music. And then at some point you realize that you can add a fourth tone to a chord, and make a major 7th chord, or make a dominant 7th chord, and there's sort of make a 6th chord. And when you discover those things, it's like, at least for me as a banjo player, I was like, wow, that just excited me so much. Like when I was growing up, I think I was a teenager, Pat Cloud was this legendary jazz player in the Los Angeles area, and he was like a mad scientist because he was figuring out all this jazz bebop stuff using open strings. And like that just means that if you figure out a really cool jazz line, you can't easily play it in another key. You're stuck in that key because you're using an open string. So, man, I would like to see inside his brain someday. But one thing he showed me that really stuck with me, I just try to get this banjo in a little bit better tune. Our HVAC broke today in the studio, so I'm enjoying Nashville heat in true Southern fashion. But he showed me this little chord melody for Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. This doesn't have much to do with the blues, but it is kind of leading us there. And he showed me these different chord voicings that you could play. I'll strum them so you can hear them better. And so when I heard that, I was so excited because I really had never thought beyond just like G chord. And adding color to
Right.
chords is something that I love to do. I mean, I love doing chord melodies like that little bit of Oh Susanna, like in my course as a way of teaching people to discover the fingerboard, which is something I'm a strong proponent of. Even though when my teacher told me that, I ignored him because it didn't seem like any fun at all. One of the ways I try to make it a little bit more fun is to show people how you can play simple chord melodies as a way to like help you find those chord shapes, make it more fun.
And are you playing all those on the top 3 strings right now?
Right, so I like to cheat because I have like the 3 fingers here, and so I
Mm-hmm.
just use 3 fingers here, and so I tend to do a lot of 3-finger chords, and obviously you could do bigger chords, but you could play O Susanna that way, or you could also look for these other harmonizations. So all that to say that there's so much more than just straight root 3-5 chords. So in thinking about the blues, I love Joe Pass's guitar playing, and that's like he's my go-to guy when I'm sitting there having ADHD with jazz guitar. And man, I love his playing so much, and I really resonate with it because his approach is so chordal, And I think about the
Right.
tune Foggy Mountain Special a lot because it's like the one blues kind of tune in bluegrass. I can't think of another tune. Can you? That's like a standard in the bluegrass repertoire. That's quite like
Right
that?
offhand, I know that there are, but right offhand, no.
Yeah. So it's just like your basic 1-4-5, and when Earl Scruggs played it, and the way the band played it with them, Foggy Mountain Boys, they were just playing like your regular kind of G, C, D chords. But what if you thought more of the dominant chords, which in this case is like adding the flat 7. So just for anybody who's not quite there yet, because I was not quite there yet at a point, and I remember it, when someone says flat 7, it's like a moment of panic. But I like to tell people not to panic because all you have to do to find it is count up the scale, which I'll do the easy way, and you count up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So the 7 is a major 7, and if you flat it, there's your flat 7th. So if you add that flat 7th to your triad, then all of a sudden you have the G7 chord. And one of the things I love to do is find all the different voicings for that chord. Because there's so many of them. And if you can kind of get those under your fingers, there's one. There's one too if you use open strings. There's with closed strings. There's another one. That one. So like if you can get these chord shapes under your fingers, then there's all these places that you can go when you're backing up someone who's playing Foggy Mountain Special. Using that shape, you can go up here to your C chord. Back down here. So you could go up here to your D7 chord and walk it back to your G7 chord, or it's generally better to try to stay in one area on the fingerboard. Well, it's more efficient anyway. So saying you wanted to do that, you could go from this G7 chord, where your 7's here, to this C7 chord where the 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So you could walk back the root to here, and there's your 7 and a C chord. So you're basically going from this G7 chord to this C7 chord. I love this movement because it's so elegant on the banjo. And then you could use a chromatic movement to move back into the C7 chord and then back up here. And there's your D7 chord, just 2 frets up from your C7
Right.
chord. And there's your C7 chord again. So that's just so elegant. And you can even just use the 2 notes. So this is pretty cool movement because you're going from G7 to C7. What's so cool is you don't have the root in the chord, but the band gives you the root. So you could just kind of do this kind of thing. There's your D7. So for all the banjo players out there, that's a really fun thing to mess around with next time you're in a jam and people are playing Foggy Mountain Special. Just try to use this shape. Just try these 2 fingers.
So what notes are you playing? Are you playing the tritone there? Is that why you're moving back and
Yeah,
forth?
well, I don't think it's quite a tritone. I'm playing the 3rd of a G, which is a B, and the flat 7, which
And
is
the 7th, yeah.
the F. Yeah, and then when I slide my hand back here, I've got the third and the flat 7 of the C. So all that stuff sounds so complicated, but it's really just a shorthand to refer to what notes you're playing. So don't be intimidated. I used to be intimidated. I try not to be now. Yeah, so there's your C7th, back to your G, and then up to your D7. And obviously you could use that idea kind of on any chord, but if you're sticking with the blues 1-4-5 in the key of G, those are really good. And then there's some other like nice voicings that you could do. This is a Joe Pass thing I heard him do, and I'm not exactly sure what chord this would be. He's got a B flat on top of this like G7
sharp 9 there.
two-tone. Yeah, I guess it would. And then you've got your chromatic movement into your C7th.
Cool.
So that's another nice thing. So there's all kinds of great stuff that you can do there. And then when you get up the neck, look for those G7 shapes up the neck. Like you could do that. So in this one, I actually do have the root right here on the 2nd string at the 8th fret and my 3rd right there, but grabbing the 7th there. And so it kind of becomes this fun game of like finger twister or something. Remember that old game Twister? It's like
Twister.
If I said, okay, yeah, I want you to hold down the root on the 2nd string and play a G7 chord. Like, what are all the different places you might think of? That'd probably be the first one. But then if I said you could play the 7th on the 2nd string, but I wanted you to keep your hand up in this part of the neck, you might do that. Grab that position. So anyway, that's some stuff that I really like thinking about because it starts to really open up the fingerboard for you. And if you're playing a tune like Foggy Mountain Special, you're not outside the box by any means. You could play those chords, and people would think that they sounded really cool, but they wouldn't. They wouldn't feel like you were doing something that wasn't stylistically within the box. I think, you know.
Yeah. Do you ever do that like gospel move where you, especially in a blues tune, where you'd like bounce to the 4 chord off of the 1? So you'd like it's on a G chord, but you'd bounce to the C chord kind of within.
Yeah, I think Ryan Kavanaugh does something like that too, doesn't he? I've heard him do something a lot like that. I'm trying to think of what the shape was that he uses. That wasn't it, but yeah, I know what you mean though. I do that occasionally, and then there's ways, within the 1-4-5, you can add 2 5-1s in there to kind of make it harmonically more interesting. There's like bebop changes, I guess, is what they are, where you start to stick some other harmonization in, and like you said, some gospel changes too. So
yeah,
I think that there's a lot of room in all of that, especially for bluegrass players, because I think blues and bluegrass, they share so much in common, especially like those 3 stinking chords, So I think that there's a lot to be pulled out of that and brought over to our world and applied in a way that can be musically satisfying and not stylistically inappropriate, which is always 2 good goals to have.
right. That's my question. Next question is it okay for somebody to go and kind of pull some like blues guitar licks, not really electric blues, but like more like Delta blues, sort of acoustic blues licks that would work well on the banjo, and while playing
not?
bluegrass though, is that not breaking the bluegrass?
Well, okay, so I would say that if you're playing Foggy Mountain Special, it would be completely great. If you're playing like "Rollin' My Sweet Baby's Arms" and you're really playing out of like the 3-finger style, I don't know. I think I would say anything's possible, but in that case, I'd probably be more trying to think about something that flows within the 2-feel of the tune and doesn't really interrupt the flow of what you're doing. But thinking about Tony Rice's playing, a lot of that especially that lick, which was such a signature lick for Tony Rice. A lot of that comes from the blues, but sure. Or that kind of thing. All that stuff totally works on the banjo. The only problem with it is you will then be out of tune immediately, like I am. So you're going to go out of tune, but it's still worth it sometimes. And like doing that kind of choke, just like taking that C chord. You can do that. another great one is like grabbing a 13 chord, G13 chord. I really love this lick that I learned from Sonny Osborne up from Pathway of Teardrops. He went into his C chord, and this G13 shape gives you a lot of, you could comp on that.
Yeah.
You could go there for your C7, like C7 with a 9 in it. Just all that means is I'm playing a C7 chord, but instead of having the root there, I moved it up to a D note, so the D note's the 9, because it's, you count up the scale. It's 2 and a 9, so we call it a 9. So that's why that's called, would be called a C9 chord. So from a G13 to, I mean, there's all these possibilities. And another great source of inspiration too is someone like Don Vappy, who was a Steve Martin Banjo Prize winner. It was 2 years ago, I think.
Yeah, I don't
Great
remember the year, but yeah, about 2 years.
Yeah, tenor banjo player, kind of Creole musical tradition, plays some really swampy bluesy stuff. And you know, our banjos aren't that dissimilar. You know, a lot of the ideas, especially with the plectrum banjo that's tuned so close to our banjo, a lot of the ideas are very adaptable, you know?
Right, yeah.
And I found that listening to Eddie Peabody lessons on YouTube, which is another fun thing to do if you ever have spare time. Because when I was growing up playing at Magic Mountain in the 70s, people would always come up to me and say, do you know Eddie Peabody? And I'm like, I know Earl, I know Ralph, I know Tony Trischka, but I don't know Eddie. And he was a vaudevillian. He was one of the most famous entertainers in America at a certain point, probably in the 20s, maybe 30s. And he played plectrum banjo, and the only difference there is it was 4 strings, and his 4th string was tuned down to a C. So kind of like the Home Sweet Home tuning. You know, and so there's a lot that you can pull from that too. So I guess all this to say that you got to have your solid right hand technique, which is why in my school I focused a lot on building up good sense of time, and all the rolls and all that stuff. But then once you get that solid foundation, there's a lot of places that you can go that are pretty musically adjacent to where we are, you know, that are great places to go for inspiration. So
yeah, it's great. You know, you're letting people. A lot of people have barriers that they feel like they can't pull from other places of inspiration to the banjo. They really put some walls up when learning the banjo.
Yeah. Well, I agree. I mean, it's such a in so many ways it's a challenged instrument, you know, and like it starts with the jokes and all that stuff, and then you think, well, you know, a lot of people hear the banjo because they heard dueling banjos, and then there's all that, you know, kind of like demographic baggage that goes along with that, or they hear it, you know, in the movie Bonnie and Clyde, and they're like, oh, this thing is just like for bank robberies and high-speed car chases. And then, you know, in some way, I feel like the 5-string banjo in the mainstream perception can be very pigeonholed. But it shouldn't be. It ignores the history of this instrument, and it ignores the breadth of music stylistically that's been played on this instrument over the course of multiple centuries, you know? It's super fascinating to me that way. But I was going to, since we were talking about Eddie Peabody, I'm sorry I interrupted you, David. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, you know, if you ever have time, you can find he made instructional albums. So we can think how fortunate we are these days to actually have instructional videos. Back in the 50s and 60s, probably in the 70s, people were learning from LPs. So you can hear his voice, you know, explaining what to do. But his tune, The World is Waiting for a Sunrise, is another. You can take all this information and use it on our banjo. Whoops. It's all like, I didn't realize that. I didn't know that there was such a kinship between my banjo and a plectrum banjo. But yeah, the only difference is he's kind of playing out of Home Sweet Home tuning. Right. And he doesn't have a 5th string. But all that chord melody stuff, it's all right there, you know? And it's so cool, I think. I love that stuff anyway. And then you can take a tune like this. it's all just, it's so relatable. It should make people super excited because we're not limited with this instrument, even though mainstream perception might be that it is a limited instrument. It really isn't. It can do so much. And there's so many places to pull ideas from.
Yeah, you've always been able to demonstrate that well through your career. You've always, inspired me that in this realm of, trying other things. And then we have and on your new album, you can definitely hear a lot of these different influences. You have a number of different styles going on. We have a question here from Isabella Tamiris asking, someday I would love to hear Alison talking about how to play other rhythms on banjo like samba or choro. As a Brazilian, I think she does an amazing job in this area.
Oh, Isabella, I'm so honored to hear you say that. Someday I'm going to come to Brazil and really learn something about choro music. I've loved it since Mike Marshall turned me on to it with his band Choro Famoso. He's an amazing mandolin player. Well, everything player. He's just an outstanding musician, and he started, teaching me some choros way back about 20 years ago, and I just find that musical style to be just like it's almost like having the perfect meal where everything on the plate just complements everything else, just the way those songs are structured, those tunes. So yes, I'm packed. I would love to I would love to come. Bring my nylon string guitar too, because the music of Antonio Carlos Jobim has been a huge source of inspiration to me. The harmonies of his music, and that guitar style is just right up there next to Earl Scruggs for me. So,
Yeah.
so thank you, Isabella. I would love to come do that in Brazil.
You have a choro on your new album on banjo. How would you explain what choro music is?
Okay, I hope that I do it justice. I've been told that it's just like Brazilian folk music. It's an instrumental music that has a structure, kind of the way some of our Texas fiddle tunes do, where you'll like have multiple sections, like an A, B, C, D, E section of the tune. That's how I understand choro music to be. So it's kind of these tidy little melodies, multiple sections, but just like this perfect spoonful of ice cream or something. They're just so gorgeous. That's how I would describe choros. I'm sure that Wikipedia has a more technical definition.
And did you write that choro that's on your album? Is that an original?
Yeah, it is. I wrote that for Anat Cohen, who's an amazing jazz clarinet player. She's well known in that space, but she loves choro music too. And she plays a lot with some different Brazilian groups and spends a lot of time in Brazil. So I watch her YouTube videos, and I wrote that tune inspired by her, hoping that she would agree to play it with me. And I've never met her, but we were introduced through Roger Brown, who was the president of Berklee College of Music. And he connected us by email, and I was like, I know you don't know me, and I'm a banjo player. Don't hold that against me. Would you consider? And she was so wonderful, and she was like, yes. We talked on the phone a couple of times. And we did it virtually, so we still have never met face to face, but I would love to do more with her, because it's interesting, because banjo and clarinet are both outlier instruments in jazz, and I think that there's a lot of possibilities for what you could do with banjo and clarinet. In fact, somebody told me recently that Pete Fountain was Earl Scruggs' favorite musician, and he was a clarinetist.
Yeah.
So long answer to your question, but yes, I did write it, and I wrote it for Anat with her in mind.
And so recording that, you had almost everything done except the clarinet part? Or
No, that's really, I'm glad you asked that. We had it was a bit of a trick. So it was like the silver lining of the pandemic in a way, because it forced us to think about collaborations with other musicians in a completely different way. And pre-pandemic, if I'd had the idea of recording a tune with Anat, I would have been thinking, or saying, so when are you going to be near Nashville? When could you fly here and spend a couple days? And of course we couldn't do that, so we had to think about other ways of doing things. So the way we did that track was to record a banjo part with the drummer and piano player that I work with playing parts, so that there would be some kind of harmonic reference point and a time reference point in the banjo part. And then I sent it to Anat, and she put the clarinet part on it. And then I was like, well, I'd love to have 7-string, like Brazilian 7-string guitar and pandero. So she recommended two guys that she works with, Douglas and Alexandre Laura, who are amazing players, whom I've also not met them either. And so we sent the track to them. And as I got people's parts back, I got rid of the scratch parts that we recorded here with drums and piano. And then our piano player at the end of the whole thing went back now that he could hear what the 7-string guitar was doing, because he didn't want to get in the way with his left hand of what the guitar was doing. So he went back and did like a more right hand kind of sparkly kind of piano part. And then I redid the banjo now that I could like hear everything. So that's how that track came together. But we did start off with a road map, and then we kind of took parts away and put parts in. And it's really amazing what you can do with all this stuff behind me, you know.
Yeah. And when doing a track, virtually almost like that, and sending parts all around the world, kind of, would you always do it to a click to make sure
Yeah,
it's easy
I mean,
to layer things on top of?
yeah, we say like doing it on the grid, right? Kind of need to have that grid. I mean, you don't have to, but it saves a lot of time and keeps you from having to chase your tail, you know,
Right.
to have that. So yeah, there's always a click, and you know whether or not someone is using the click, that's up to them. You wouldn't
Yeah,
have
yeah.
to once there was some time source, but
Sure.
it makes life easier for the engineer too, because if you're flying other parts in, you need to be able to line it up with something.
Yeah, it can easily kind of get just a little bit off, and as you're layering things on top, it's
Right.
can come apart a little bit.
You know, and then what I've found, you know, like having spent a lot of time in this very room, is like you can expend all of your energy chasing something like that, and then you don't have the energy left for the creative part, which is never a desired outcome. So it's much better to use, I think, to use the technology to your advantage, so you can stay fresh for having a really good idea about something, rather than using all your energy to just try to line up the guitar with the piano, you know.
You just mentioned having energy for the creative part, and that kind of triggered something. I've been thinking about a lot lately. Is how do you kind of, because you're a very busy person. You have, you're a professional musician and record company owner, and how do you make time for that creative energy space? Like,
It's
what do you do? Do you have a method of like a very your normal day things being very very organized, and then you have a free time kind of? What's your
yeah,
what's your
no.
method? I don't know.
I don't know. I don't have a method really. It's just, you know, every day is different, is what I've found. And some days I get to have the space to just work on banjo, or if I'm producing someone else's record, or in the studio doing something of my own or whatever. Those are the really fun music days. And then there are just other days that are kind of spreadsheet days and, you know, project planner days, and, you know, more just like the kind of left brain responsibilities of running a record label. And I will say it's hard, and it's one of the things that makes me wonder why artists can be driven to do the DIY label thing, because I know from like deep personal experience that it's really hard to balance the two things.
Right.
It's hard to be creative and like manage a team, or and like if you're a DIY artist, you're managing, you know, indies that you're hiring to do your press and radio, and hoping that they're doing the right thing, but you have to manage their effort, and if you don't have the knowledge, that would be stressful, I would think. And it all takes time and energy and focus away from the creative side, which requires such a different kind of discipline, because you need to have the space for ideas to happen. It's really hard to sit down and say, okay, I have 15 minutes before my next call, I'm going to write a tune, or like
Right.
learn some Joe Pass guitar licks. It just is not going to happen, really. So
Yeah.
it is a challenge. I think you really kind of have to force it. I have to give myself permission to step away from the business stuff sometimes and say, okay, well, now I'm going to focus on banjo things. And it's nice to have excuses to do that, like a recording session or some gigs coming up, or, you know, that is part of my work. So I'm entitled to get to spend time on it, because it is a little bit like the Bermuda Triangle for me. Once I step down that rabbit hole, all the clocks stop, and I look up again, and it's somehow is 4 hours later, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's it's a challenge, but it's a
Yeah.
good challenge.
So when did you start working on this project, and what was the concept what was the concept at the beginning, and how did it evolve to what, the finished product?
Well, I started working on this a little bit before the pandemic. I mean, before anybody thought there was going to be a pandemic, like that before part, probably sometime in 2019. And I knew I wanted to make a record of tunes that I had written. And if, you know, looking back a little bit to my first record, which was an all instrumental, all original kind of thing. And I was like, well, the record that we did, that I put out before this one, was called Song of the Banjo, and it focused more on the lyrical side of the instrument and trying to help people understand. Like you were saying earlier, hearing the melody and the banjo is sometimes really hard for people. So we made a record that had a lot of cover tunes on it so people could already know the melody, then hear what the banjo was doing. So this one I wanted to just do all my own music, and which pretty much ended up being the case except for one track that was a mashup of Here Comes the Sun and the amazing Joe Beam tune, Waters of March, which is one of my favorite tunes. Everything else I wrote, and I wrote most of it with specific people in mind that I wanted to collaborate with. And one of the first tunes I wrote for the record was actually the tune that I wrote for Sharon Isbin, who's the classical guitarist. The first classical guitarist to win a Grammy, I think, and she's got a few of them on her shelf. She's a outstanding virtuoso, and I met her when we were doing a pre-telecast performance at the Grammy Awards maybe 10 years ago, and it was one of those mishmash kind of constructs that they'll do, and it was kind of a sort of Oddfellows bluegrass band. I was standing next to Ray Benson from Asleep at the Wheel, and we were playing Roll On Buddy or some really crazy thing, but Sharon was playing classical guitar, and that's how that's how we met. And I thought it would be great to do something else with her, and I reached out to her when I was conceptualizing this record and said, would you consider, and is there a classical tune that could work for banjo and guitar? And she said that she couldn't think of one, so I needed to write something for her. And so I wrote the tune Regalito. I think that might have been the first piece of music that I wrote for this record. And again, that one too, I think I was trying to figure out what direction to go with it, and my husband Gary, who's also a bass player with me and co-founder of the label, he suggested that I think of it more as a choro, which was really good advice. So it is kind of this sort of, I don't know, a little bit fun and playful, Latin-esque kind of thing, with a lot of triplets in it. I think it's also influenced by the soundtrack to the Disney film Coco, because my kids were listening to that like on repeat at the time, so which wasn't a bad thing.
Who else is on the record? You have a lot of different guests.
Yeah, well, one of my big goals was collaborating with other female instrumentalists, because we're such a rare breed. I don't really understand why. But Anat was at the top of that list, and of course Sierra Hull was too. And she's just my favorite mandolin player. Just there's nothing she can't play. And I think the tune we recorded together is proof of that, because it's a tune I wrote on the banjo, and knowing that I wanted to have her play it, but not thinking about whether or not it would be playable on the mandolin. And she told me that one of the phrases required her to play every fret on the first string from like open all the way up to the end of the fingerboard to execute it, and which is crazy. And then she just nailed it too, so she's remarkable. So yeah, a great triumvirate of female players, and then of course the amazing Steve Martin, who's just a wonderful banjo player and somebody I really enjoy playing banjo with. And we did a tune that features him on clawhammer banjo and me on three-finger banjo. And it's in double C tuning, which I could attempt to be in. I'd be glad to attempt it, and then I would then be out of tune for the rest of our conversation, but I could do it. But for all you banjo players out there, it's where you take your fourth string and tune it down to a C, and your second string and tune it up to a C. And I'll do it anyway. Who doesn't want to hear a banjo player tune, right?
While you're doing that, I'm curious on that tune. How much did you write out for Steve? How much did you? What did you tell him to? How did you describe to him to play, or did you just kind of give him the melody and let him do his thing?
I just I texted Steve this. I sent him a voicemail, and I said, "Want to write a B?" That's how I did it. And he, it was pandemic time, so he was like texting me right back and said, "Sure." And the next day, I had this. He wrote. course, he wrote it clawhammer, so that was my three-finger interpretation of it. And I just thought it was like the perfect musical reply to the A. I thought it was awesome. So then we got together on a Zoom call and, wrote some, some fancy pants chords, because I can't help myself, some of this kind of stuff, which lays so nice in C. Just to set up like a little bit of a conversation between the two banjos, and then, yeah. And that's how we did it. So nothing was written down. It's all, in true banjo fashion, it was all oral tradition stuff.
Very good.
Yeah, and then of course we wrote a number chart for the band, and kind of notated the arrangement and stuff. But it's not in notation, and that's one of the cool things about the banjo, and I think one of the challenges too, because we all read tablature. So a lot of times we're not thinking about what notes we're playing; we're just thinking about what fret on what string we're playing. So that's another thing, in my school that I've really been trying to encourage people as they build up their knowledge of the fingerboard to always be thinking about what note they're holding down.
Right,
Just so
not
that they
the number.
can move in the direction of like being able to say, well, okay, so I need to add an F note to a G triad. So where's an F? Because I didn't learn that way. And when I started hanging around with Mike Marshall a lot and playing in a band Newgrange that we had together with Daryl Enger and Phil Auberg and Todd Phillips, like all these super heavyweight players. And half of the band were just monster readers in addition to being like monster players. And then like Tim O'Brien was in that band too, so Todd, Tim, and I couldn't read. And Phil and Daryl and Mike all read like music like crazy. And so you just realize how fast they can communicate ideas. And so it was like in the process of like being in that circumstance that I realized, hey, I really need to know where to find an F note on the fingerboard. So I'm trying to get my students to think about that from the get-go so they don't have to get up to speed later on.
Yeah. You also have a tune, Tall Hog at the Trough. Sorry. You say it.
Okay, it's Tall Hog at the Trough. It is a weird word. I don't know, like the last time I said the word trough outside of the context of this tune.
Yeah. So that's an original that they wrote, right?
Yeah, it is.
And what made you think of this title here?
I was walking down the street one day here in Nashville, and I'm from California, so I'm still, these many years of living in California, and still charmed by the Southern expressions. And I was walking down the street with Eddie Stubbs, who you probably know as, he was an announcer on WSM for the Grand Ole Opry for many years, but prior to that he played fiddle with the Johnston Mountain Boys. And he's just kind of he's a real legend around town. He's a legend in bluegrass music, at least in my mind. And he's just got this voice that when he says something, you really listen. And he said to me, Alison, you're just a tall hog at the trough. So that's where it came from.
All right.
And I thought, okay, I'm writing that down. So I have my list of possible tune titles, and that was at the top of the list. And I knew that I wanted to write a tune that could be kind of a tribute to Byron Berline and John Hickman, and we lost both of them, I think in 2021, within a couple of months of each other. And for anyone who doesn't know, Byron Berline was, well, Byron and John both, like growing up in Southern California in the 70s like I did, you worshipped at the feet of John and Byron. And I grew up with playing a lot of music with Stuart Duncan, who is one of the best, fiddle players to ever live, ever walk the planet. And we were, about the same age, and so always like worshiping at their feet together. And Byron did a ton of sessions in LA in the 70s. He was kind of like the go-to guy, like on a lot of the country rock stuff that was happening in LA in the late 60s through the 70s. And John Hickman moved to LA from Ohio, and so he kind of had that Eastern credibility and Southern cred about his playing. Beautiful touch, really sweet guy. And both of those guys showed both of us guys a whole lot of stuff about banjos and fiddles. And so I wanted to write a tune to honor them, because Stuart and I used to play their tune, Birmingham Fling, all the time. In fact, I think we played it on the Opry when we were like 15. So I wanted a tune to tribute them, and so that's where Tall Hog at the Trough, where the title got attached to the idea for the tune. And then Stuart came in and we recorded the tune together as banjo fiddle duet.
Cool. Well, we have a fun little video that you're going to play too. Right
Yeah,
now, queued up.
I'm going to attempt to, because as I was thinking about Tall Hog at the Trough, I was thinking about the tallest hog of all, who is, of course, Porky Pig, in my estimation. So, and then I happily discovered that there's a lot of public domain Porky Pig cartoons out there. So we edited up this little cartoon to play along with. So I thought that would be
Awesome.
really fun for your listeners. I don't know the last time you had Porky Pig on Deering Live, but maybe this
Yeah,
is
it's
the
the
first.
first. We're breaking new ground here. All right,
Okay, well, give it a try.
here we go. That's great. You have had a great career as in the pit orchestra during the silent movie time.
I think that I might have actually. I've spent a little time creating scores for silent films, and I really do enjoy that. There's lots of room for creativity in there, I think.
Yeah, it's good practice. It's a good exercise to do, just kind of inspire you to write things.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. Definitely gives you some ideas.
Yeah. Let's see. So we have some comments here. We have a comment from Ken Trout that says, "I really like the 'Here Comes the Sun' mashup. Are you going to put out a tab version for us?"
Oh, I could be tempted to do that. One of the things I love to do is like playing that double C tuning. One of the things I hate to do is write tab, but I do like to share great music on the banjo. And one of the cool things about that is the way the melody lays on the banjo like it was written for the banjo, especially in double C tuning. So, yeah, I could illustrate it if you want to hear more tuning, but Why not? So again, you would just tune your second string up to a C, and fourth string down to a C. Anyway, that melody's all right there.
Yeah.
So when I discovered that, that was like a happy discovery, and it would be good to tab it out because I think a lot of people would enjoy playing it. But it's not
Yeah,
too
I
hard
could
to find. So until I get the tab done, yeah, feel free to try. Double
Right,
C
yeah.
tuning, it's all there. It's all open. It's all right under your fingers. So see if you can find it.
Yeah, I can see this becoming another one of those standards that you hear when we're working at Merlefest and people come by and play the banjos, that they'll start playing that tune.
Well,
Wouldn't be
there'd be worse
surprised.
things for sure. It's such a great tune.
It is. I want to bring Jamie back in, and we have some other comments and questions from the viewers, I think. Yep.
Just wanted to follow up on the tab point as well. When we posted that video on the page for this particular episode, I think there was like 14, 15 comments down there. I think half of them were, "Oh, can I get a tab for this, please?"
Oh,
This is
okay.
cool.
Well,
So
sure.
definitely not a singular request.
I will do that. I could do that for people.
Oh,
I know that I needed. I remember begging for tab to Doug's tune when I really wanted to learn that Doug's Dillard tune. So I don't want to deprive people. It is so fun to play.
all right, guys. Well, this is being recorded, so you heard it here first. We can hold it
Okay.
until next time.
Okay, you can hold me to it. You can hold me to it.
DJ Buell asked a little earlier in the show, this is one of my favorite ones, when we were talking about blues, when you end up in a blues jam and someone says, "Take it, banjo," how can I avoid embarrassing myself?
Okay. So was it the banjo part that's embarrassing?
No, he's just
No,
he wants to be
just
able to be
What to play?
in a blues situation, yeah.
You can just stay in these shapes, stay in your chord shapes, So you can't really go wrong if you stay in these chord shapes. Just go grab this G chord. Remember I showed you this G7 chord. Stay there. So I just did all that and I'm almost to the end of the phrase. All I've got to do is play some D7 stuff. So don't shoot too high. Just stay here. Stay under this G7 shape because, you don't really even need to change chords. You can just really play stuff that's in under your fingers. Like that pentatonic scale stuff. And you can play consecutive notes. So like if this is a note that you want to go to, you can slide into it. And if you play multiple notes, it gives the banjo a little bit more body too. So rather than going out on a limb and getting stuck up here somewhere and it's like, oh my god, what do I do? And now I'm just playing single notes that are just really pingy and they're not sticking out. Stay down low. That's my tip. Let me know how that works for you. But if you stay out of this chord shape, there will be some meat behind what you do. And I think that could really help too, because you're competing sonically with instruments that have a lot more body to them. So
Yeah.
that would be my hack for that situation.
I noticed you're also playing up towards the neck as well. So the banjo sounds a lot fuller anyway. Is that intentional, or is that just kind of...
Yeah, that's a really good point. I wasn't thinking about that, but yes, because you wouldn't want to. I don't think you want this. Well, I think this sounds better. It makes the strings ring in a better way.
It sounds like more ish, rather, a bit more grit to it than...
Yeah,
than
I
the other
agree.
way.
So that's
Yeah.
a really good point, Jamie. So I would try that too. Is playing up closer to the neck and grabbing a fistful of notes rather than just one, and staying in one chord position that's, and just experiment with what you can do that's right under your fingers. Start there, because I think a lot of guitar players do that too, honestly. You can go all over the place, but a lot of times I feel like those blues guys are really just trying to milk the notes that are right there under their hand, And they just have a lot more sustain, and when they bend, they don't go out of tune, but you can always bend. You can do that, look. It's just you're going to go out of tune, but that's okay if you know that's going to happen. So now I know my third string's out of tune. I can just tune it a little bit by pulling on it if it went sharp like it did. I expected it to go flat, though. If it had gone flat, I could push on it up here, and so you can kind of get yourself back in tune after your solo.
Awesome. Very
Yeah.
good. Very good. Dave, anything else?
Well, I do see a request for if
I saw
we
that
want to play something out. Isabella is asking if you could maybe play a little choro.
Oh gosh, I don't know if I remember that one at the moment, but Isabella, I owe you one. Yes, I haven't played that one in a little while, but I need to get that one back under my fingers because it was a. I remembered a little of it anyway for you. It's a tricky one because it's in B flat, but it lays because you've got that G, which is actually a note in the scale. So you can. It gives you an open string to travel on, which is always important to have when you're playing melodic style.
Yeah.
But Isabella, I'll come play that for you in Brazil someday.
Oh, there you go. That's cool. I always like, you can always tell when you're in the presence of just a virtuoso musician when there's, I can't remember, and then they proceed to just remember and just say this piece out. Jens Kluger does that all the time. He says, I don't remember how to play it, and they just absolutely
Oh
kills
yeah,
every song
Jens
that
is
they play.
remarkable. He's
But
he's one of
as
my
are you,
favorite
that's my
players.
point. Yeah,
Well,
but
you're sweet to
as
say
are
that.
you. That was where I was going. Was the you couldn't remember, but you still managed to just pull this thing out that was a million times better than I could ever dream of playing anything. So,
Aw, you
well
guys
done.
are so nice to me. Thank you.
We like you. We'll have you back. Hey, the cool
Okay.
thing is this is episode 89, which means we've got 11 more to go until we meet the magic 100. So we're gonna have to do a
Yeah.
special episode on the which will be hopefully this year.
Wow.
If we stop slacking and stop taking breaks between episodes.
That's very exciting for you guys because you started during the pandemic, right? This was a
Yeah, we did.
pandemic project.
Yeah.
Yeah. So have we come that far since those days? That's encouraging.
And this is like your third?
Mm,
Yeah, I think.
yeah. I can't
There's a
remember
lot more
exactly.
cats in the first one.
Yeah.
Yes, there are always
Yeah.
the cats that can somehow hear Zoom calls and streaming events in a way we can't. So they're
Little
always
children.
crawling around me when they hear it. But yes.
Awesome. Very good. And go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say. I mean, anytime your needs call for banjo, feel free to holler at me.
100%. And so you're in San Diego next week, and you're playing UC
Mm-hmm.
San Diego, right? Is that
Well, we're playing a new venue that they have that's downtown called Park and Market.
very cool? I know there's a couple
So
of viewers who are
excited.
going to be there as well. They mentioned it in the comments, so that's exciting. And,
Yeah, that's
which
awesome.
one
Well,
we can do?
we're excited to be coming back to San Diego, my hometown. So it's been a while since we've played in San Diego. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, we'll see you on the Wednesday here at the factory, and
Yes, well,
get a few things going. So,
sounds
Alison,
great.
thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a lot of fun, and
It has
always,
been a lot of fun.
Yeah, always
you.
fantastic. Thanks to Matt for setting up the audio in the background. That was awesome. And,
I'll pass
Dave.
it along.
Any further
Yeah.
comment? You good?
Yeah, thanks for doing it. This was good, enlightening for me, and I think I'll see you at Fresh Grass maybe. I think I saw you're on the
Yeah,
schedule.
we'll be there in North Adams, Massachusetts at Fresh Grass in the fall.
Okay, very
Yeah,
good.
I'll look forward to it.
All right.
Do we want to play anything out, or do we played a lot today? So
Oh, I don't know what. Do we have any requests besides the Shore, which I can't remember all of? I'm sure we don't want to hear more tuning, but I could play a little of Earl's Breakdown because I had the incredible, unspeakable honor of getting to play Earl Scruggs' banjo a couple weeks ago, his Granada banjo.
That's
It-
right.
wow.
Yeah, it was officially donated to the Country Music Hall of Fame. It had been on extended loan, but the Scruggs family decided to make its residence there permanent.
Jerry Douglas
So,
was part of that, wasn't he?
They did a really cool ceremony to induct the banjo into the Hall of Fame, and the Earls of Leicester came down and they got Leicester's guitar out of the case, and I think I can't remember if Monroe's mandolin was part of it. I think it was, and Paul Warren's fiddle was part of the deal. So all the instruments
Wow.
got to play together again, and the humans that got to play the instruments were beside themselves
I bet.
with
Just real
excitement.
quick, before you play, how was that experience? Like, how was playing the banjo? I mean, outside of the fact that it's Earl Scruggs, like, did it sound and feel as good as everyone thinks it should be?
Yeah, I mean it's really alive. It's really alive.
Yeah.
It still has Earl's like dirt and stuff right here.
Wow.
Like you
Wow.
can feel it's a little gummy, and you're like, oh, that was Earl's DNA right there.
That's awesome.
So it was pretty special. And then when, like, even if it was just like some dude's banjo, you'd be like, well, this is a great banjo. And then you realize that it was not only Earl's banjo, not just like one of Earl's banjos, but it was the banjo that played those classic songs.
Okay.
And so, it's like all of us standing on that stage, we're standing here because Earl Scruggs did what he did on this banjo, and Lester did what he did on this guitar, and we were all, it was
Wow.
really amazing. It was like, goose flesh kind of thing. I was standing backstage with Sean Camp and holding the banjo up next to, so it could talk to Lester's guitar, just like letting the instruments have their moment together. It was super vibey. I mean, I couldn't believe that I drew the long straw or whatever it is, that I was the lucky one to get to do that. But it was very special. And Charlie Cushman played a little bit of Earl's Breakdown on the banjo too, and we kind of passed the banjo back and forth while the curators of the museum held their collective breath as we passed it back and forth. But we promised we wouldn't drop it, so it all turned out okay.
Awesome. Alison, thank you so much, and we'll see you next week. But in the meantime, let's get out of here with some Earl's Breakdown.
Oh, let's see if I can
Yeah.
remember this one.